Yeah. All right, we should be live. Cool. I see a bunch of stuff here. So while we sort out the queue, fellas, welcome on. We got a new face here, Evan from DY. Jamie's out doing whatever Jamie's doing, putting his various glasses and backgrounds on. So he'd said you're a data wizard, so we'll hold you to that. Don't screw anything up. No big deal.
I'll do my very best. Yeah.
Shit,
good, in good company here.
Yeah. Jeremy Neal, fucking psyched to have you on. We're going to do a bunch of stuff here. Okay, so I think let's start with this Charlemagne first. If you guys can see the chat, he's asked about future, or Chuck Lemaine, future graphite octopus. And so what antenna do you think I should use? Well, that should be pretty easy. And then we'll do some hotspot troubleshooting after the antenna stuff. You guys good with that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Super. Okay. Who's got what?
I'm gonna take a look at that.
Yeah. And then you guys should be able to share screens if you're seeing anything super amazing that is popping out to you. If not, no big deal.
Yeah. So future graphite octopus, I'm seeing it's Bob Gap, according to the stats. And I'm just going to take a look at beacons. You know, my favorite thing, of course, is always to double check the radio parameters, make certain that the hotspot is hearing things pretty well. You know, checking the RSSI and the SNR. You know me, I like to compute the noise floor, roughly. And let's also make certain we know what country we're in. This kind of looks like North America. All right, so we got the US 915 band, meaning everyone transmits supposedly at 27 dBm. I'm seeing the last witness beacon here, February 1st, 8:28 local time. That's about an hour and a half ago. With an RSI of negative 113 dBm with an SNR of negative 1. That's great. That tells me there's not a lot of noise problem going on here. The radio is working well. The other things I would want to do, which I don't really have handy, is kind of a distance to RSSI metric to see, you know, looking at far away entries. What do you see for like, I see something that's supposedly 3.9 kilometers away, but a negative 123. Well, that beacon actually looks a little funny. So I think this, my opinion, is just not a lot of hotspots nearby. Does everybody else have a handle on this one?
No, Neil, are you muted? Evan, you see anything on this one?
Yeah, I'm going to try to bring up a simple simulation that's pretty rough, but might give us an idea of at least like omnidirectional versus directional antenna. So let me share this.
Sweet.
And give everyone some context too. This looks like we're in the Central Valley of California, which is pretty flat. So we should be able to go pretty far in all directions.
Yep, so that's what I'm seeing too. Pretty level. You know, disregard some of the parameters here. We're just getting a rough sense of the topography. And you know, based on where this is located, I'm not seeing a lot of obstruction. So I would say, you know, omnidirectional antenna makes sense.
Cool. Just get an Omni up high. Yep.
Yeah.
Dig it. Easy stuff. I think with this antenna stuff, we got to be careful. Like, unless you have some crazy circumstance, an omnidirectional up high will always be the right answer. And the gain on it doesn't seem to make a huge difference. You can use anything from 3 to 9. Like, it doesn't seem like it's giant. Although, Neil, and thank God you're here, Germ, you had said something last time about sensors and spreading factor that I just didn't remember. And how higher gain antennas were going to have more of a problem with it. Do you remember that first before I ask you about it? Okay.
Yeah. It's just that a lot of hosts are putting these antennas up stupidly high on 10 dBi antennas, and then if you're walking nearby with a sensor, it's just not going to be as good. So it's not that great for data. So you want to go medium dBi for better spread for devices. You're not trying to witness sensors 100 kilometers away. You're better serving the smaller regional area as good as you can, and a very high gain antenna's meant to go really far out, whereas lower gain serves that area better.
Was there something on spreading factor too about that, or was that something I'm just like totally misremembering?
Maybe in relation to the spreading factor, if it's lower, it's faster and won't go as far, but the higher spreading factors it's further. But I can't think of anything.
Okay.
I saw your video the other
Yeah.
day, and you asked someone related to it, and I was trying
I
to
could have
figure
sworn
what we
you'd
were
said
talking
something
about.
about high gain or a problem. Jeremy, does that make any sense to you?
Well, I'm just, reiterating exactly what Neil is saying. At least as far as spreading factor really is a trade-off. Devices can change the spreading factor. It's kind of the person who deploys the device configures it, and I cannot remember which way it goes. But one spreading factor sacrifices speed for data clarity, for data redundancy. So it transmits very slowly. It takes a long time for the radio to transmit all the data in the packet. But as a consequence of it being slow, the signal can be heard a lot farther. It's a lot more resistant to noise. So if you really are worried that your device is going to be deployed in a place that's going to be pretty far from the nearest hotspot, you might put the spreading factor into that mode. Consequently, though, it actually kind of takes your battery power down a little because you're on the air longer. Now, if you flip the switch the other way and go for a different spreading factor towards the fast end, you can transmit your packet really quickly, but you're less assured that someone's going to hear you. It's more susceptible to noise. So that's the only thing I can say about spreading factor is when you're deploying sensors and also when you have a hotspot listening to things, you'll tend to hear devices farther away if they're using slower spreading factors and vice versa.
Okay. Well, I didn't hear whatever it was I heard right and thought there's like some crazy thing. So you could just ignore whatever I said in that other video because I'm not getting it. All right. So I think we can jump over to the GristleKing.com, the Deliverance entries. If you guys are on the chat and you want your hotspot kind of featured on this thing, please put it through the entries. It's way easier for us instead of going back and forth in the chat and you're like, hey, check out Tawny Snowy Owl. And then we've got to ask, well, what do you want us to check out? On the form piece, it asks like all the information that we need. So I'm thinking, fellas, that we can start January 10th with late honeysuckle borer. And just in broad strokes, the reason I picked this one is it's a pretty common request that I get is, hey, my hotspot was doing great. I changed one thing to try and make it do better, and now it's not doing what it was doing. And so as we go through this late honeysuckle borer piece for the three that are on here, is let's think not only how to solve the problem, but how to show people how to solve their own problems, right? Because if we just solve one hotspot here, who cares? If we show 10,000 people how to fix their hotspot, that's pretty awesome. Do any of you guys want to start with that, or should I just pick Neil? Okay, Neil. You want to take a crack at this? I'll get everyone else off and put up.
Sure, I was still reading the piece a little bit, but there have been some network issues recently, right? So often when you look at really small time frames of data like this, so he's talking about I was making this a day and now I'm making this a day. You're going to see some fluctuations anyway, so it's hard to tell from days of data. You really need to be looking over larger time frames, but generally, from the sounds of it, it could be unrelated, but it could be his setup. It's just one of those things you need to test, right?
Yeah, 100%. Dig it, love that. And then what's the minimum amount, Neil, that you recommend people take as a time frame to look at data for a good signal to noise ratio?
Sure, I'd do a month personally, at least a month. I mean, it can change so much, and some days that you can find, if you've made an antenna change, that one day another hotspot in your area might go down, and you're thinking, oh, it's lower rewards, this is worse. But yeah, a month's worth of data, because RF's weird, right? It changes day to day. Every broadcast is different.
Okay. Cool. And let's see, I'm going to come to Germ next. I'll jump on that a little bit. Is that Neil, on the month stuff, I like it as far as like good information, but a lot of people are getting their hotspots up kind of right now, and they want to know what's the soonest that they can look at data. And I've always told them the shortest amount of time is 7 days. Are you on board with that, or is that still like, hey, that's not really that useful?
It's useful, but it's obviously not the clearest of pictures sometimes. If a hotspot goes down in your area, it might go down for 2 or 3 days, right? And so that's half of your data gone. But just to get an initial outlook, it's good.
Okay. Dig it. Germ, what are you seeing for this thing?
Again, are we talking about savory mahogany chimpanzee?
No, late
late
honeysuckle borer. My bad.
Okay. Oh my goodness, I did not study on. All right. Well, reading up on this, well, let me just echo basically what Neil said, and I'm going to bring in a little bit of geekydom here. Is that the uncertainty principle applies? And if you don't remember that, Heisenberg famously brought this up, discovering at the very bottom of physics and quantum mechanics that the more you try to pin down something in a location and time, the less you know. And conversely, the more you zoom out and average over, days or weeks or even a month, the more of a picture you get how things are going. Now, this is, of course, very frustrating to try to figure out. You want to know very quickly whether your setup is working or not because you want to do rapid changes. And certainly frustrating to know that, but you have to wait at least a few days. And for me personally, I think waiting a week is usually pretty good. The other thing to do is also to check some of the network statistics that we have on the 𝐷Y/ETL and to see if generally, like, what is the network average for a given day of earnings. That helps you rule out whether there's a network problem or whether the problem's with you or your local area. That's also a really good thing to check. And of course, Explorer shows you the average earnings for a hotspot across the network. And it's an average, of course, but some people do more than the average, some do less. Anybody who's tuned into this podcast, videocast, is someone who's probably going to be on the higher end. You should always expect to be making more because you're investing time and you're putting up antennas. You're really tuning things out. That network average is for all hotspots across the board, whether people are working on them very well or not. So looking here, again, the description here is that this hotspot's been up since the beginning of December. It's a sense cap, bringing in about 0.1 a day. I'm assuming that's HNT. That's a little bit under the average around that time frame. I believe around then we were doing about 0.118. It was last in my head about kind of the average on the network across the time. So things should be a little bit down. We got more hotspots, right? And I'm seeing that there was an improvement after getting an 8 dBi antenna and putting up a mast. So let's see, what was the big change?
Yeah, so there's one thing at the bottom, Germ, that is this confusing piece to people, is that it was, I think they said, my hotspot was beaconing one time a day. A few days ago, it just stopped beaconing for about 3 days. And then it started and it beaconed 4 times in one day. So yeah, that's a pattern that doesn't make sense. Can you walk me through how that pattern might have happened?
Sure. So the funny thing about this network is everything's actually randomized, and it's done so for a reason, because every hotspot gets a chance to challenge every other hotspot. That's how this blockchain works. Because it's random, you can see on short time scales what appears to be completely nonsense behavior. So this particular part of the blockchain is called targeting, where every hotspot in the world gets a chance roughly 4 times a day to challenge another hotspot. And the process begins with let's pretend you're the hotspot. You find a random hotspot on the Earth's surface to challenge. It's actually done by hex first. You target a hex, and then your hotspot looks up all the hotspots inside that hex and then chooses someone to challenge. So because it's random, it's actually hard to predict what's going to happen. And especially on a day scale, it can look very strange. So again, for me, my figure of merit is a week. How many times did you beacon or get challenged in a week? Seeing a change from day to day is not unusual given how random things are. It can also be horrible if a lot of hotspots go down for some reason. You'll see less challenges because there are less challenges being made. So
okay, so
that's
kind of
going
anywhere
from 1
between
beacon
1
a day
and 4,
to 4.
totally reasonable.
Yeah, but that's you can go from 0 to 10. There are strange cases where you can get targeted 10 times in a day. It's unusual, and but not impossible. So because it's random, we always have to kind of say, what's the standard deviation? I wish I had that number there. Maybe Evan can get at this.
All right. Well,
do the math. We have a million hotspots, challenging 4 times a day. What's the expected average and standard deviation there? But it also could be that you have one of those days where there's a lot less beacon activity. So I'll hand it off and kind of think about
So I'm not sure if can you see my window now?
Yep, I can see it. I can make it
so I've got
full screen.
Yeah, so one thing I'm noticing is, actually this entry is from January 10th. So actually, after submitting this, they looks like they had a little bit of a bump in earnings and in Beacon's witness. Another thing I noticed is this main pewter mantis that's pretty close by. One of its key witnesses was actually, looks like it was down for some time. So, just kind of gets at the point that sometimes even if you're doing everything right, you're relying on your neighbors a little bit. So if somebody nearby who's a reliable witness, if they're offline for a week or so, like this looks like, that can impact your rewards as well.
Dig it. Okay, cool. That is useful. Let's see. The next thing I've got is up on here, the very top of the thing, I think is the hotspot germ that you were looking at, is the savory mahogany chimpanzee. And this is a pretty standard question. Here's my setup, bobcat, stock antenna on top of the roof, enclosure, PoE. Like, I'm doing, I think, everything right is the general thrust I get here. How do I get my earnings higher? And before we jump into that, before I send it to you guys, the big first piece is your earnings are not just a function of how well you do. Your earnings are a function of your location in relation to other hotspots. And so when we get to Evan and we're looking at the data on that side, one thing to be really paying attention to is, Evan, I think you just said, like, hey, look at your local hotspot, or this local witness was the pewter mantis, whatever it was. Like, it's not just your hotspot, it's the hotspots around you. It's whether or not they're online. It's their setup as well. If they've got some crazy antenna or some crappy antenna, or they're in the basement or on the roof. Because we earn 70 to 75% of our HNT from witnessing, it's not all about just our hotspot. It's the ones around you. So sometimes it's nothing that you're doing. Neil, I'll start with you again, if you're cool with that, on what was it, savory mahogany chimpanzee. Anything to add to that? No, you good? You mute.
Sorry, I was half looking at it then. I was still looking at the hotspot. Yeah. Let me share my screen. I think it's important to talk about how we test hotspots, right?
Yeah.
Go through that process of what you do to diagnose it, because a lot of people get lost with, I'm guilty of this as well. We go to these websites and assume that they work, and assume we're reading them right. But mostly, my killer tool for me is having a mapper, right? So with a mapper, I can test if my hotspot's live. I can also see all of the hotspots in the area that I expect to hear if they hear the data.
Yep.
And that is like the killer diagnostics tool for me.
Yep.
So really, the best thing I can say to testing a hotspot is run a Bluetooth diagnostics report. It tells you exactly what the sync is. Any other website that tells you what the sync is lying to you. It's based on gossip, and it can be very, very delayed. So always look at that blockchain height in a Bluetooth diagnostics report first.
Okay, and if you can't get to Bluetooth, is there a second best that you're recommending? Do you have a screen shared up or not yet?
Yeah, I'm just trying to find it. Sorry, it's
also exciting. Take your time.
But if you can't get on a Bluetooth diagnostics report, a lot of the manufacturers have a web dashboard, right? So you can normally type in the IP address and locally view the hotspot, and it will list a diagnostics report, show you the blockchain height. So those kind of local calls to view them are always real time, but anything else is relying on grabbing it from the API, which is just slow, right? So it takes time for that gossiped information to come out. So often folks will come to me and say, well, I'm 100% synced, but they're reading it off of a website, or, when they look at the Bluetooth diagnostics, they see that they've dropped out of sync. They're 300 blocks from height. So it's really important that you look at that figure first before you look at anything else. But once you have that information, you can trust these websites, right? Like Hotspotty has a live check. Helium Status has a live check.
Yep.
I think there's a few more now, Discord bots and everything. You can go and check them on. Just don't trust those for sync information. What you're looking for there is that you're up, you're pingable, you're not relayed. Relayed can be a huge problem, so fix that if you can. But beyond that, what I really like to do in my area is run a mapper, because I can see who checks in on it. And if I have 6 witnesses, then I know when I do POC that those are likely to witness it too. So it's like a killer tool for my arsenal that I really wish hotspot hosts would pick up, a mapper. because
Okay.
it just gives you so much more advanced analytics on your setups.
Yep.
You know.
And when you're saying a mapper, I mean, let's keep in mind that not everyone kind of loves geekery as much as the four of us do. Is what does that look like to? I mean, is even as simple as like, what does it look like to get a mapper? Do you buy one? How do you see the information that it's putting out? How do you work all that stuff? What does that look like?
Yeah, so there's plenty of mappers out there. I've got a few I can show you off. Most of them are in my office. This is a new one I'm playing with, the 𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗏.
Yep.
This is a 𝗚𝗏𝗏𝗏 walker.
Yep.
This is like an advanced field tester.
Yep.
𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, the trackets, for example.
Yep.
So you buy one of these sensors, and they're just a LoRaWAN sensor with a GPS module in it.
Yep.
When it has a GPS lock every X period that's set in firmware, it will send a packet out and say, I'm at this location. So in console, when you add these kind of sensors, you can say, I only want the first one to hear me, or I want everyone to hear me.
Yep.
Now, I always turn on everyone just because I like using data on everything I do. But what that will tell you is just how many were hearing you in your area and if they're hearing you well. So you can kind of get a feel to how the network's working in your area with these devices.
Yep.
So if you then go and change things like an antenna, you can look at the signal strength that the device is getting through and to see if your coverage is better. But one cool thing to do is you can just walk away from your antenna with one of these devices and produce a coverage map for your area. So everyone that visits your area will know that there's coverage here, and they can use sensors, which is so much better than just here's a hotspot on a map.
Yeah, totally. Dig it. And Evan, I saw you holding up, what is that, like an LHT95 or something?
Yeah, I got one of those 𝗪𝗛𝐺 ones.
Yep.
If you're going to do mapping, we'd love it if you also participate in the Helium Mappers program, so that everyone can benefit from that data that you're contributing, and that that also helps the network in terms of when users see that coverage map, they get excited about how filled it in is. So.
Yeah. How do people do the mapper stuff? Is that just going to mappers.helium.com, or is there more to it?
Yeah, so I was working on dropping the link in the Helium docs. There's a coverage mapping startup guide. So for a lot of sensors like this one, and I'm sure the ones Neil has, there are step-by-step guides for how to hook up this sensor to the mappers database.
Yep.
And if you have any issues with that, we'd love to help you out in the Discord as well.
Dig it. Okay, Germ, I'm seeing there's someone called Night Ninja who's got a question for you on the tube chat. Can you tell the issue with rack from Helium Direct, as I believe it's not rack's fault? I have a lot of racks and would love an answer. I'm not really sure what that question is, but I'm assuming we've had some problems with racks lately.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Let me get up to speed there. So I was in a different chat window.
Sorry.
Point me out. Read it again.
It's Night Ninja. Let's see. Can you tell me the issue with rack from Helium Direct? As I believe this isn't rack's fault.
Since I am part of the Helium team.
Yep.
Well, yeah. So Rax shares firmware with the Helium original hotspots, and so it had some insight what's on that firmware. That firmware, is going through a lot of changes right now, particularly to help really get to the bottom of what's going on with SD cards, make those faster. The blockchain keeps getting bigger and bigger, which means the SD card fills up faster. And that's the biggest issue that's going on, is trying to keep a balance between letting that card run and then having to clean it out and resync. And that has to be done. My latest statistics show me on a 32 gigabyte SD card used for the blockchain, we're now maybe 3 weeks, maybe even 2 weeks between the time it takes to start fresh and fill that card up completely. And when it gets filled up completely, right now the best way to get it to run fast is to simply blow everything away and resync from the latest snapshot. So there's a lot of things dependent on that working well. One is detecting when the space is getting low, and I think the latest mechanism only really detects it at reboot. So there's some changes to maybe have it detect earlier. There's some code going in to free up the blocks while it's running. There's a lot of things going on. And what's another big one? Possibly some file system tuning that can be done. We're in a kind of a quandary. Really, the best thing to do to solve this problem is to get light hotspots. light hotspots will be the answer. I swear it's going to solve world peace. Your children are going to be less itchy. Whatever jokes you can do from that.
Yep. Hey,
but
question on the
then,
SD cards. Hang on a sec, Germ. Question on the SD cards. Is a 32 gig enough, or can they do a 64, or can they do a 128 or 256? Is there an SD card that's too big?
I don't think there's an SD card that's too big. Again, we're talking about for racks and OGs.
Yep.
We're talking about Raspberry Pis. So the Raspberry Pi can only do so much. Neil, do you have any spec? I think it could even be a terabyte.
For some reason, I've always heard it's 128 max.
Okay.
For the
okay.
Pis.
Well, do some research. It could be 128 is max. 128 is certainly doable. If you're going to replace an SD card, this is certainly worthwhile until we get to light hotspots. Number one recommendation. Absolutely. Try to get an SD card that is high endurance. Here's another fact a lot of people may not know. A typical hotspot writes about 80 to 100 gigabytes a day to that card. Even if it's a 32 gigabyte card,
dang,
it's writing and erasing a lot of data. And because of that, the card needs to be kind of what we call video dash cam grade, which has a similar wear mechanic.
Yep.
So if really you want to get these to last long, get a high endurance card. One that's meant for a lot of, doesn't have to be fast read and write activity, has to sustain a lot of continual writing over and over again. That's what makes these last longer. So definitely, if you feel like going to a 128 gigabyte card, that should get you, doing the math, that's 4 times bigger than a 32. So that might get you a couple of months between cleanouts. And that might be enough to carry us over to light hotspots. Okay. Another big key thing, don't copy a card from one to another. Whenever you're upgrading, start with the image. If you go to Helium's Discord or Tirax's Discord, or there's a few help links on there, start with their image. Start with the instructions there, download the factory image and put that on your card. Don't copy it from another card because you'll end up copying the size restriction. The card will still think it's a 32 gigabyte card if you start from a 32 gigabyte and move it to a 128.
Pro tip right there. Yep. And Neil, if you don't have a video on flashing, do you have a video on your channel about flashing cards, how to do it?
I do, yeah.
Awesome. I just got asked to do it, and I'm like, I'm sure there's someone who knows more than I do, so I'll point them in your direction. But it's not the hardest.
But there's a second.
Good.
There's a second part to that as well with the SD card issue, isn't there? The snapshot thing.
Yep.
So we have.
Let me explain that too.
Regularly.
Yeah. So in order for the hotspot to resync from scratch, there needs to be a snapshot available out there. And snapshots are generated by our consensus group members, the validators. And for quite a while, they have to agree to generate a snapshot. And there were some problems with getting them all to agree. And it was taking a few days before they would all agree and happen to line up. And we think we found the reason behind that. It was obscure stuff deep in Erlang, how things get serialized into the data. And there was a randomness part in there that would cause them to disagree about the hash. And they'd say, all right, well, punt it. Let's just keep doing transactions. We'll get back to that. So we've been having to make snapshots manually, but there is some work. I don't know exactly when it's going to land. Maybe it's already landed to get those snapshots to happen ideally twice a day, which would mean you're only ever there's about a block a minute. There are 1,400 minutes a day. If you do the math in your head. If we get it twice a day, you should only be behind 700 blocks or so from a snapshot. So that's one thing that's also being worked on by the blockchain team. To get that to happen. So a lot of moving parts. And let me just answer this. I see a lot of questions about light hotspots. When are they coming? Soon. It's the number one mandate in the engineering team. And that's really what we've got to work on. Of course, all these other things are fires that have to be fought. So there's so much benefit from getting light hotspots.
Yep. And the initial thing on light hotspots was end of Q1, but my guess it's going to be like mid Q2 or end Q2, and that's my guess as a non-Helium employee.
We could get Amir on here, and he could give you a perfect non-fungible date. He's good at that. So
he keeps saying really cool things about it, though. He was mentioned in one of the rooms the other day that we might get the upgrade to full before light gateways are produced and things like that. So some wild statements at the moment coming from him.
Okay. Let's see. Let's do this Bobcat flatline thing, because it's not just Bobcat. So this is the next one. This is from Mando, Micro Aqua Dragon, indoors on Wi-Fi. Neil will tell you that don't do that. Get it off Wi-Fi. Get it on Ethernet. And then they're saying Bobcat suddenly flatlined on me. I had a family member check the IP, came back with an error page. So it's not just Bobcats that flatline. All of them can do it for a number of reasons. Evan, have you looked at this thing yet and seen kind of what it's been doing?
Yeah, I'll bring mine up. To me, it looks okay, at least in terms of rewards.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a pretty good day yesterday.
Okay.
And so, yeah, maybe, I mean, it looks like it's not being port forward, right, Neil? If we have an IP4 address here, or relayed, sorry. It looks okay to me, but we can look at some of the networking stuff.
Sure. Let's see. Neil, have you seen anything? You seen anything else in this on this 𝗪𝗁𝗏?
Sorry, every time I gotta get my screen share set up, I
take your time.
find a problem. I'm just looking it up, but one thing I have noticed is that the API doesn't hold a listen address for it. So that usually means that it hasn't spoken to the API servers in about 2 weeks. After a while, they clear out stale information. So something's not getting through on the peering by the looks of it, but I'm still loading the page to see.
Sure. When you say something's not getting through on the peering, what does that mean for those of us who don't understand that?
Yeah, so when your hotspot joins the network, it announces itself to peers, so through the seed nodes, and it will connect to peers, and it will say, this is how you find me. And that information spreads, and that's what we call gossip.
Yep.
And that gossip eventually makes it to one of the API servers. So the API runs what's called blockchain ETL, which kind of like reads the blockchain from the network and then writes everything to a database. So for that to be blank, it normally means that that node hasn't heard from it in a really, really long time. I think it's 2 weeks, right? I think it's 2 weeks. Something close to that anyway.
Okay. Okay, so, I mean, the fix for this, so if your hotspot flatlines or it does anything, the fix is always, or almost always, to make sure it's connected via an Ethernet cable. Like, don't rely on Wi-Fi. And then at what point do you guys say that a power cycle is pretty reasonable? Is that 24 hours of kind of you being worried? Is that 48 hours of you being worried? Should you just do it right away? Or should you just not do it?
Just so, in relation to the Bobcats, the best thing to do is go onto the IP, the local IP in a web browser. Mm-hmm. I think you said that one was showing an error. So normally it will show an error, miner not started or miner failed. So at that point, I totally do a reboot, is saying that the software is down.
Okay.
But yeah, generally, if I get a hotspot go down personally, I leave it a couple of days just to see if it'll come back first, and then probably power cycle it.
Love it. Yeah. Some of us are more patient. Jeremy, you got a boogie? I know you got a...
I've got to sign off for now. Keep up the good work, guys. I see some good questions about witnessing, and I'll beacon some good education to be made here. So see you guys next time.
Cool. Let's see. I'm seeing, do you guys want to do this curve tangerine troll? My topography is high, approximately 150 meters above sea level, using a McGill 9 dBi, getting half decent earnings, but hotspot recently went offline for a couple of days. With my topography, is the 9 dBi too much? So I'd say those are two totally separate things, right? Your hotspot staying online or offline is not a function of what kind of antenna you have or how high you are. It's a function of its connection to the internet and maybe what the hotspot's doing. And I think we just covered this. Is there anything you guys want to add to this curved tangerine troll thing? Nope. Okay. Ripping. And we can go to the chat. I think, is there anything else? I got straight vanilla elephant. Oh, right on, Chris. You put that in there. Cool. So at the top of the Deliverance entries, straight vanilla elephant outside. It's on Wi-Fi, get it off Wi-Fi, and it's on grid. I have the miner in my attic and drilled a small hole to get the cord outside. I have an 8 dBi and a 5.8 dBi. I've got Hotspotty and Helium status.io. I have a GL travel router. Consider climbing one of these trees. I got myself in over my head, and here I am. Okay. So there's no actual problem with straight vanilla elephant. You're just trying to figure out what to do as a general set of instructions. Let's see. Neil, do you want to talk about whether or not this guy should climb a tree? Or is there anything else that you might start with before that?
Hey, I mean, if you've got the right training, definitely. But I've heard of a few people doing it, but you wouldn't catch me up a tree. I mean, you're just going to land yourself in trouble, literally. So Yeah, you've got problems to deal with trees as well, right? Swaying and things like that. I always find with antennas that every area is different, right? You might want to consider buying a 5 dBi, a 3 dBi, a 8 dBi, and seeing what works best. But there are tools that will lead you down the right path without having to go out and purchase them, right? So Helium Vision or Hotspot RF are great for doing that, and they'll let you put placements in and test the area and see what you're likely to get. So, you can put in an estimated height. Maybe that height's as tall as a tree. Maybe it's just the building next to it, and do some simulations to kind of guess where you roundabout be, right?
Dig it. Okay, so just sim the thing out and decide from there. And when you're saying, Chris, that you got yourself in over your head, like, dude, we're all there. Just keep going with it. Get the thing on Ethernet, not Wi-Fi, and that's probably the single biggest thing.
I mean, to me, the biggest point is that your majority of earnings come from you witnessing, right? So whatever antenna you're going to buy, you're only affecting what you send, really, right? In the majority. So, even if you did pick an 8 dBi and it's not the best for your area, you're still going to witness pretty well, right? So it's not going to be the end of the world. Maybe just test and you can prune, but I always find that chasing the last 20% of optimization, whereas you're much better off putting that into more placements or new ideas rather than trying to make it perfect for every place.
Yeah. I'm seeing something else here. This Christopher Cotton Fenestra covered up the Ethernet port. Have you guys seen this? Someone told me the other day, like, oh, you can cut a hole, but there's an Ethernet cable in there.
It's a Raspberry Pi inside, isn't it?
Okay.
It's a Raspberry Pi inside, so it's got Ethernet, but they haven't been licensed to run Wi-Fi. So even though there's not licensed to use the LAN port, but then so they covered it up, so they can only run on Wi-Fi.
So it physically, let's see, you could connect.
It physically has a port,
right?
But they're not allowed to use it, so they've covered it up with a case.
So
a lot of people.
I should probably know this, and German's going to be pissed if I don't. So Fenestra, basically, they created a hotspot that, for whatever reason, doesn't have the licensing to use an Ethernet port. That seems odd.
Yep, I know, right? I don't understand it myself, but they've covered it up. You can literally cut it out and use it. People have been doing that for a while.
Okay, so you can use it. It works. You're just not allowed to. Or it's not within what they did. Okay, cool. Interesting. Let's see. Elegant Mandarin Sardine. Evan, I'm going to put this one on you. So Elegant Mandarin Sardine, wondering what I can do to get better rewards. It's currently rocking a McGill 7.5 tuned. So I think what I'd like to see, Evan, is just kind of going through what you're thinking on this stuff and how you're walking through solving the problem.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So first thing, sorry, I didn't kind of give an intro to this. This is one of the dashboards that we really like on Metabase. This is Jamie Dubs' doing, but it gives you a nice summary of past performance of your hotspot. So this one, actually in terms of rewards looks great. It's actually on an upward trend, which relative to the network as a whole is the opposite of what we see.
Yep.
So maybe there was a down period here due to some kind of factor, but I'm looking at are you online? Are you beaconing at a healthy rate? And is there like a strange number of invalid witness receipts here? It's always normal to see a few invalid receipts in your in your array, just because, like, for instance, this lone opaque sparrow is less than 300 meters away, so anything there will get picked up as an invalid receipt. It's too close. So I bet you that's what's going on here. But yeah, I mean, in terms of increasing rewards, I don't know. I mean, I think you're doing pretty well relative to the network.
Okay, cool. Super cool. Neil, anything to add on that one? I got a couple questions in the chat if you don't.
Yeah, just a quick one. What I'm seeing is that it can hear. It has that hotspot has 15 witnesses, but it's only hearing 8. right? So when it beacons, it's heard by 15, but when it's hearing others, it's only hearing 8 in the area. So I'd say it's not something that he can change to improve his area. It's more about the quality for the hotspots in his area, improving his earnings. But like shown, he's still doing pretty well over the last few days from what I can see.
Okay. I got another one here. So random lotto for witnesses seems to be BS. Why would my hotspot always hear every beacon from a neighboring hotspot that's too close? So I always get invalid every single beacon this guy sends. So let's talk about like the random witness piece first and the reasoning behind that. Neil, do you want to take that, or Evan, or do you want me to go through it?
I could give it a shot. So for every beacon that's transmitted, there's a kind of a buffer there, whereas maximum of just change from 18 to 14 hotspots can actually be on that witness list for a given beacon. Yep. And those hotspots are randomly selected from everyone who heard the packet.
Yep.
So technically this recent change from this decrease from 18 to 14, technically, I guess for any given beacon, you're less likely to have witnessed it. Of course, over time, this should average out and not really make too much of a difference. But, for instance, for this question specifically, my hotspot is always seeing every beacon from a neighboring hotspot. Usually people aren't complaining about witnessing too often. So it's possible that there just are less than 18 or 14 hotspots around. So every beacon that's emitted by that challengee is heard by you. That would be my guess of what's going on there. And just while we're talking about this specific change, I think it's important to keep in mind like why we're doing things like decreasing the size of those POC receipts, and the big factor is kind of reducing bloat on the blockchain, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
So if you're looking at like what the database that we run the ETL from, this is I think we're over 2 terabytes at least at this point. The blockchain is pretty large, and so things like whatever this is, a 20% drop in the size of a POC receipt transaction, that makes a big difference, as well as these beacons happening less often. So it shouldn't affect your rewards in the long run, because that bucket that's allocated for POC, that size of that bucket isn't changing.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just a frequency thing. So
right. So rewards will get spikier, but over time they stay the same. Right?
Exactly
so
right. Yeah.
I think that's a good point or good thing to hit then, is that means that you are going to see more variance day to day and maybe even week to week than you used to see. So you have a couple days where you might not make anything, and then you have a couple days where it's banger. Is be super careful about making a physical change and then thinking that is reflected over the next 3 days. To Neil's point, probably wait 30 days at this point. Minimum of 7, but definitely don't just look at it on a 3-day basis because you changed an antenna and got different earnings. The randomness piece is interesting, as we really have to think about how do we want to incentivize the network growth. And if everybody always gets everything every time, then the rewards get A, super small, and B, there's not a way to kind of keep everything as fair as it could be, because everything becomes too static is one way to think of it. So yeah, there's more theory behind it than I've got the ability to explain, but the randomness piece is an important aspect of this. It's not just like an add-on, like, we'll make it random as well.
Because there's ways to, you could always game it. For example, the easiest way was with the DIY hotspots. They didn't have to sign transactions against the ECC key, so they could always deliver it faster than a full miner. So they would always be in the beacon list. So having that random period and that time of 20 blocks to report witnessing really gives a nice fair spread to everyone, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice for those of us that had DIY hotspots, but when it went away, it's like, all right, fine, this is more fair. And I think, to that point, I don't know what the official numbers that have been released on DIY hotspots, but there was less than 1,000 that went out there, and I think it was somewhere between 300 and 700. So when we talk about those, like, oh, that wasn't fair, like, that's such a tiny percentage of the network that it was just a test to see how it worked. It's not something to really worry about. Neil, James Starkey has got, hey, I've got an outdoor Wi-Fi access point to connect my miner. Why exactly is the Ethernet better than the Wi-Fi? A connection is a connection, right?
Yeah, generally, the connection's a connection. With the Wi-Fi extenders, it's often a lot better, right? So often folks will do it from a Pi, and a Pi has a little trace on the board for a Wi-Fi antenna, and then depending on your make, it's wrapped in a metal box. So the Wi-Fi quality is just shocking, so you wouldn't trust it. But if you have got, shockingly bad. So if you have got enterprise gear or Wi-Fi extenders, it can be a bit better, but I still don't trust it as much. I've never trusted a wireless solution ever. I built mesh networks in my house. I still have dead spots. It changes day to day. So I always prefer Ethernet over Wi-Fi. But if you know what you're doing, it can be better and it can be fine. But generally, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, just a simple test. I always just do like an internet speed test on Wi-Fi and on Ethernet. I'm not a networking expert, but that result is pretty clear usually.
Yep. Okay. What does weeks without sending beacons mean? It means you should unplug your hotspot and plug it back in. That's probably the kind of shortest answer to that question for Matthew. I think, Neil, you said you waited a couple days. I also wait a couple days. I think I've got one hotspot that's down south that's just a drive for me. And that thing has been offline for as much as a week and then come right back online. I've thought about putting the little Wi-Fi power cycle switch on there, but it's too tempting to power cycle it as soon as you see something's wrong. And that can, especially if there's an update coming through and that's what's kind of slowing the whole thing down, you can just make the situation worse. So almost always, if it's connected to power in the Ethernet, leave it alone. If it doesn't do anything for, 4 or 5 days, then think about power cycling. But okay.
Yeah, because if you've hit a moment where there's, you've resynced, you have to resync the whole thing. You could be down for 2 days. And if the snapshot's really far behind on some of these hotspots, you could be down for that long. So I always like to just give it a couple of days just to check it's not one of those events before power cycling it.
Yeah, totally. 𝐶sanity digital 𝗨𝗨, the miner installed in a tree 50 feet up against Neil's better advice. 6 dBi antenna Panther. What is it? Panther X2. Been up for 3 days now. Brand new, obviously. One branch of the tree is blocking about 50 degrees. Should I move it? There's 2 ways to answer this, right? One way is like if you want to optimize this thing and not worry about it, is yes, move the antenna. Like get it to a place where it has 360-degree view. The other way is to actually test it, which is one of the ways Neil had held up earlier. Is there's a device called the 𝗚𝐿𝐴𝐻, where you can attach any antenna to it, you can put it in any location, and you can force out what is the equivalent of a beacon out packets, and you can see if those things are being received by hotspots around you or not. So you would know in that sense, or that instance, if you used a 𝗚𝐿𝐴𝐻, whether or not that tree branch was an issue. Now, 𝗚𝐴𝐻s are running, $350, $400, so they're not the cheapest things to use. But there's 2 kind of options. Is like you can approach it and say, okay, I'm just going to do the best possible and not worry about whether or not that was needed, or I'm going to test it and see if it was needed and then execute against that. Anything else to add on that, Neil or Evan? No? Okay. Dig it. All right. Anything else to cut down the tree? No, don't cut down the tree. Come on. We only got one planet here. Let's keep this place breathing. Anything else that you guys have?
Just one thing on that.
Sure.
Just one thing on that last hotspot. It looks like it's just gone from relay to not. So that information could take a while to spread out. And from what I can see of the rewards, it's just not really earning much at all. So looks like it's just getting going really from a period of not the best network connection. So I'd probably leave it a couple of days from this point and you might see some better results.
Okay, and this is heliumstatus.io. This is your tool that you built. Can you walk me through how you found that? Like, where did you go from sign in to realizing that information, and what was the thought process?
Sure. So obviously a lot of people have used this site. We recently made a decision to go paid only, but it's $2 a month. We think that's fair. So everything I show is behind a paywall now, just so people are aware.
Good.
But it allows you to test live hotspots, right? So I can just search for this hotspot, click it, and it takes a few seconds because it's doing some magic in the background. but right away it warns me of what's wrong with the hotspot. So it's telling me the observed listen address. So this is live. This is what the hotspot tells me, and this is what the API has for it, right? So it tells me that I can see from here that this is a relayed address. So the API thinks it's contactable on the relay address, but the live address is the IP. So obviously he's fixed port forward in here. This is what most hotspots can dial him at, right? But there's a period of gossip time where this information takes a while to update. So a lot of hotspots could still be trying this address. So this tells me that if this hotspot was the target of a beacon, it might not make it through, right? So it's likely it can make it through, but it might not, or it might not have for a period. So,
okay, cool. So you went to heliumstatus.io, typed in the hotspot name, it came up, it told you what was wrong, and even if you don't understand this kind of observed and API listen address, like it explains it pretty well. And then basically you want those two addresses to match, and if they don't match, the steps there are like wait 24 hours, and then what else could you do if they don't match and you don't really understand networking?
Sure. I mean, you just have to remember, if we can find the listen address, this address is the API address is not really that relevant, but it's just an indicator that something might be wrong. The great thing about status is it will always show you in a warning at the top of the screen what it thinks is wrong with your hotspot. So it does the major checks like, is it pingable? Is it relayed? Is it connectable? And everything like that. So it will show you errors live on the screen of anything that it finds a problem with. It's nice and easy, and you can just see everything from one screen. We added the deny list the other day as well, so it lets you know if you're in the deny list, which is quite interesting.
All right, dig it. I mean, I think you should be charging more for that, but that's just me. So for the audience, I think that should be up closer to 10 or $20 a month. But Neil's being nice and going for 2. I think the last one that we'll finish up here with is this Oliver Ward lone clay bull based in Guernsey. Evan, I'm gonna hit you on the data in a second, but I'll give some kind of preamble on it. So stock antenna connected 149 km to a UK site. Would it be worth investing in a 9 dBi antenna to try to hit more hotspots in the UK, which are, that must be close to 100 kilometers away? So Guernsey are a bunch of islands. I should know this. I got family in Guernsey from a million years ago. Is that right, Neil? Am I getting that semi right? The geography right? Okay, so it's hitting across water. And then let's see, I'm going to bring up what you've got, Evan.
Yeah, pretty cool location.
Okay, cool. I'm going to pull your stuff off. So we're seeing 2 separate things. We're seeing both Helium Explorer on the right, and on the left, we're seeing the 𝐷𝑦ETL. Before we answer the question, should you get a higher gain antenna, what do you see, Evan?
Well, this might be an interesting scenario because this is, on an island. So, there's a limit probably to how much, how much more you can get out of your coverage, if that makes sense. Because to me, it looks like you're witnessing pretty much all the other hotspots on Guernsey, which is cool. Yep. And the rewards look great. It's reflecting that. This is an example of the kind of reward scales, I think, working out pretty well because, everyone here looks like they have an ideal reward scale. And this island seems to be covered pretty well. So, I'm not an expert on antennas and how that would affect things, but my instinct is there's only so much you can cover here. And I think you're probably getting the most out of it. So well done. This is a great example of the power of the people's network. It's kind of cheesy, but think of Verizon or a telecom investing to put coverage in a smaller area. It's kind of it wouldn't be first on their mind for sure, but here, because people are incentivized to set these up themselves, it looks like the coverage happened pretty quickly. So
okay, zoom out again, and Evan, so we can see what that looks like geography wise. So I'm guessing that if we look at that, actually we'll pull it so we are just seeing the one. So if we look at where this is geographically, it's got, I don't know, what is that? 50K to the closest land, and probably there's another island to the southeast that looks like it's got a couple hotspots on it, and then it's probably a good 150K to the south shore of the UK. You can hit those for sure. Like, those distances aren't impossible with LoRa, but they're not super reliable. You won't always hit those. It'll be like a cool thing. It'll be really sexy because you see this big long yellow line. But in general, I would focus on keeping coverage on the island of Guernsey and not worry too much about trying to reach across the channel to England. Maybe you kind of push a little bit for that southeast island, whatever that is. But I wouldn't worry about getting a higher gain antenna. Just put up a couple more hotspots in the, the southwest of the island. Anything to add to that, Neil?
Just that he'll have days where the weather's perfect and the atmosphere is absolutely perfect, and he'll hit the UK. You know, if he goes to a 9, being in the EU 868 region, the power will be lowered quite a bit. Okay. So he'd affect his local beaconing as well, because the power will be lowered to make it legal for the region, right? So a 9 dBi is almost double what the limit is, right? So the limit's close to 2.3, 2.4, I think, from memory.
Yep.
So if he goes for a 9, he's going to lower his power output a lot.
Ah, okay. So there's actually there's a pretty strong reason not to go for a 9. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't go so big to serve the UK occasionally when, you know, he's probably doing great coverage right now as he is on the island.
All right. Ripping. I think that should do it. We're at 10:55 or close enough to kill it. Is there anything else that you guys have before we sign off?
Nope.
Okay.
No, cool, good.
All right, yeah. Go to heliumstatus.io, right? And then the ETL is it dy.etl or is it the other way around?
ETL.dy.org.
Okay.
Yeah, you can sign up. Make sure you sign up with a Gmail account.
Yep.
Let us know how you like it.
Ripping. Thanks a ton. And if you want help with the Helium stuff, the GristleKing.com site has got Helium Basic Course, Helium Vision Masterclass, all kinds of stuff to help you learn about Helium, and a ton of articles that are also semi-paywalled. I think you can read 5 for free, and then you have to start paying $10 a month. So nice, Neil. 5 of them, huh? I might have to raise that paywall, but let's see. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks a ton to Neil and Evan and Germ for giving their time. Super cool. And we'll catch you next time we do this. See you guys later.
Later.
Bye.